All right, well, let me move on now and jump on to today's Rightside Way monologue. And I got to start by saying yesterday marked a major anniversary. It was not a national holiday. There were no courthouses closed. There was no barbecues, no fireworks. But it was significant nonetheless. Yesterday marked 31 years to the day from the Battle of Mogadishu. Mogadishu, Somalia, made famous by the book and movie Black Hawk Down, a battle in which 18 U.S. Special Operations soldiers, Rangers, Delta operators, SOF aviators, all lost their lives in an epic gun battle. Alabama's own Mike Durant was taken captive and became one of the only post-Vietnam POWs, and we're thankful that he returned home to our state. Two Delta Force soldiers voluntarily gave their lives in a heroic stand to protect Mike Durant. That's Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart, and they were both posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. And aside from the two Medal of Honor winners, the Battle of Mogadishu, formerly known as Operation Gothic Serpent, it saw 60 Silver Stars, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 91 Purple Hearts. Y'all, it was an amazing stand, amazing men, and they are not forgotten. They were warriors, and we honor their memory 31 years later. But you may be hearing stories like that and thinking, "Wow, those kind of people. I mean, golly, I'm not that. I'm not a Medal of Honor person." But listen, the reality is this, and this is what I want to talk about. In my opinion, the warrior comes from the heart. There's going to be skills and hard skills and training, and there's going to be mindsets and things that have to be instilled or inculcated in a person. But the reality is, being a warrior still comes from the heart. You ever been around an organization where there were unsung heroes? The ones that no one pays much attention to? I mean, their name's not on the sign out front. They aren't the big wigs. They might not have the best office or know their way around the boardroom, but when they're gone, you suddenly realize what they meant to the overall function of the team. Well, let me tell you about some folks who I'm aware of that have made that kind of a difference that maybe people don't always think about. Chaplains. You heard me, chaplains. Military ministers. I've seen a good chaplain keep a unit in fine function even though they had nothing to do with the war fighting or the vehicle maintenance or the medical care. It's true. And even though they are non-combatants, there are chaplains who have also been awarded the highest decorations for valor and heroism under fire. Classic example. So I was at Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, Georgia, recently. And I drove past one of the parade fields that I'd seen many times, and I noted the sign. It's called the Field of Four Chaplains. So here's the story on that. If you're not familiar, settle in. I'm going to give you a good one. So in World War II, the USS Dorchester was ferrying 902 U.S. soldiers to the war effort in Europe. German U-boats were constantly prowling the vital sea lanes, and several ships had already been sunk. And on a frigid night near the end of its voyage, a Nazi periscope broke the chilly Atlantic waters at nearly 1 in the morning. And the U-boat fired 3 torpedoes, one of which hit decisively and below the waterline. The captain immediately gave the order to abandon ship. Other ships began rushing in, but aboard the Dorchester, panic and chaos had already set in. The blast killed scores of men. Many more were seriously wounded, stunned by the explosion. They're groping around in the darkness. Men jumped from the ship into the lifeboats, overcrowding them to the point of capsizing some. And through all the pandemonium, though, according to surviving witnesses, there were 4 Army chaplains who brought hope and despair into despair and light into darkness. And those chaplains were Lieutenant George L. Fox, a Methodist, Lieutenant Alexander D. Good, a Jewish rabbi, Lieutenant John P. Washington, a Roman Catholic priest, and Lieutenant Clark V. Poling, a Dutch Reformed minister. The 4 chaplains spread out among the soldiers. As the ship sank, they worked to calm the frightened, tend the wounded, guide the disoriented to safety. Witnesses remember hearing the 4 men offering prayers for the dying and encouragement for those who would live. And one witness, Private William B. Bednar, he found himself floating in oil-smeared water surrounded by dead bodies and debris. He said, "I could hear men crying and pleading and praying." And he recalls, "I could also hear the chaplains preaching courage. Their voices were the only thing that kept me going," he said. Another sailor, Petty Officer John J. Mahoney, tried to re-enter his cabin, but Rabbi Good stopped him. Mahoney, concerned about the cold Arctic air, explained that he had forgotten his gloves. "Never mind," Rabbi Good responded. "I have 2 pairs." Mahoney later realized after he had survived that Rabbi Good was not conveniently carrying 2 pairs of gloves. He had given him his own gloves. Well, by this time, most of the men were topside. The chaplains opened up a storage locker and began distributing life jackets, and the ship's engineer, Grady Clark, told later how he had witnessed an amazing moment when there was no more life jackets in the storage room, and so the chaplains just calmly removed their own and gave them to 4 frightened young men. Now, here's a key point. When giving away their life jackets, Rabbi Good did not call out for a Jew, and Father Washington did not call out for a Catholic, and Reverends Fox and Poling did not call out for a Protestant. They simply gave up their life jackets to the next man in line, and as the ship went down, survivors said they could see the 4 chaplains, arms linked, braced against the slanting deck. Their voices could also be heard offering prayers together. Of the 902 men aboard the Dorchester, 672 died. And Reverend Fox and Rabbi Good and Reverend Poling and Father Washington, they became enduring examples of extraordinary faith and courage and selflessness. Each of those 4 chaplains, they were non-combatants. They had no weapons in their hands, and they were posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and the Purple Heart. It's an amazing story if you get down to it. 4 men who were not headed to Europe to kill the enemy, but who were nonetheless crucial to the vitality of the units they served. And I'd say they were warriors, because as I said before, it's the heart of the warrior that matters. Look, I had occasions in the war zone to interact with several chaplains, good and bad. Let me give you a brief story of what I call a tale of 2 chaplains. When I first arrived in Baghdad, my team was attached to an infantry battalion in central Baghdad. We were under 1st Brigade of the 1st Armored Division, and that unit had been at war for 6 to 7 months before I got there. And they had a chaplain. He was a young lieutenant who did not appreciate his own role. He stayed in his room most of the time. I'm not aware of any counseling or comfort that I ever saw him provide. I'll never forget, on an Easter morning on our little fob, I made my way over to a little chapel room that he had. It only sat about 15 or 20 people, but only 3 of us even showed up for Easter morning. Out of the whole battalion, 3 of us showed up. But somebody had to go find the chaplain and tell him we were even there. And he came running in late and apologized because, in his own words, he really didn't think anybody was going to show up. He didn't even have an Easter message prepared. It was apparent to me that his role in the unit was kind of a non-issue, and he added no value whatsoever, but mostly because he had abdicated his opportunity. He didn't have a warrior's heart as a chaplain. Well, the 1st Armored rolled out, and we were backfilled by the 1st Cavalry Division. My team remained in place. We were the continuity for the new battalion. We picked up our new host unit. It was another infantry battalion out of Oregon. Some of the finest men I ever served with. And they also had a chaplain. And that man was everywhere. Every time I went to the chow hall, that chaplain was off to the side having coffee with troops. He went on patrols with the men. He held weekly services where literally the room was sometimes at full capacity with over 100 in attendance. Troops were sharing the load, leading the music, playing instruments, reading scripture. He baptized a number of men right there in central Baghdad. I remember one of those men, Specialist Johnson, who made a decision to become a Christian, accepted Christ on the fob, was baptized by the chaplain right there on the fob, and died the next week in an IED attack. And the chaplain was right there, comforting the troops and standing in the gap for them. That man made such a difference. That unit, in my opinion, was more combat effective because of him. I know it. I was there. I saw it firsthand. So look, I say all this to say, 31 years ago yesterday, Black Hawk Down, warriors who should never be forgotten. But I also would say this, never underestimate the value of your own role in the big picture. Never. You may not be the star of the show or the leader of the pack, but the mission is better off because you do your part with excellence. It is the heart of the warrior that makes him a warrior. Every vote counts, every word matters, every file, every email, every word, every act of kindness, every extra minute you spend with somebody, every greeting. You have no idea what God might do with it. The team matters, and the reality is you matter to the team. So get her done, Rightside Ruffians. And that's a wrap for the Rightside Way.